So welcome everybody to the 2016 Incisor TV European Roundtable, the latest event in our programme. I'm sitting here today in London with our guests on the eve of a major day for the UK population, the EU referendum, but I'm delighted to say we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about the Internet of Things, the devices connected with each other on the Internet of Things, and the platforms that are used to support the Internet of Things. I'm going to chair this meeting with my co-host Alex Green from IHS, and we would like to put out there some topics for our guests to discuss, and I'll kick the first one off. It's said that the Internet of Things really requires on interoperability to make things work, and that trying to exist by building systems, platforms with a silo mentality is no longer viable. What's the feeling in the group about that? Who'd like to jump in first?
Yeah,
Thanks, William.
Have a go. So with these kind of questions, I try and look at what happened in the cellular world and see if there's any analogies we can draw upon there. So if I think of the cellular world, you might think of an app, a Starbucks app. That's actually quite siloed. That data goes to Starbucks, as far as I know. I don't think it goes anywhere else. It doesn't try to interact with any other apps and do sorts of other clever things. It's kind of the Starbucks silo. But it's built upon a lot of openness. So it's built upon an Android system that's open and everyone can use, which in turn is built upon a cellular technology which is very much standardized. And it's built upon internet protocols and so on, which is standardized. So I think you have to look at this at a number of levels. You have to have openness and interoperability at the lower levels because that's the only way to get the economies of scale. But then you can get to a certain point where actually you can be siloed with your specific application, although it's probably written in an open language. The only question then is there value in that data being more widely shared, or is it better to keep it in a silo? And I think that's a question for every application to look at individually.
Does that come down to the owners of that data at that point, perhaps wanting to retain that data and not share it with others in order to retain the value?
I think so. So if you take the Starbucks
for example,
view, they would probably think to themselves, well, the last thing we want is another coffee chain to get hold of this data, so we'll keep it to ourselves. But you could imagine other data that's collected more generically about your household usage or something that a company might think, well, actually, we only need a little bit of this data for our particular, whatever we're doing, thermostatic system. And the rest of it could be useful to other people who are not direct competitors, and we might be able to gain some value from making it more widely available. So I think that will change.
I could certainly see that Starbucks might have an interest in sharing data with perhaps the car companies developing connected systems so that car drivers could very quickly find out where their nearest Starbucks was. What's some other thoughts?
I think one thing to highlight maybe is that the Internet thing is very diverse if you compare to, for example, mobile communications, which in terms of use case it was like fundamentally more homogeneous. Whereas the Internet things, I mean, it's such a vast umbrella of various applications that I think that almost by definition kind of limits the scope that you can have for standardization and interoperability. It probably will happen to quite extensively in kind of higher levels in what, let's say, standardized data models. But then look at the lower levels, chipsets and communication protocols, I think they're bound to have a reasonably high degree of fragmentation at the end of the day.
Well, the thing is, the Internet of Things, this concept, we all like to use this as if it's a fairly small thing, but it actually covers a massive amount of ground in terms of technologies and things that are being done. I would have thought that it'd be very difficult to achieve a pan-IoT interoperability. That seems just unrealistic.
It depends what we mean when we say the word interoperability, because it's so broad. You can talk about interoperability on technical level, on protocols level, on applications level, operating systems level, or cloud. But I believe that the most important thing is to see how we converge all of this together, all these various aspects, in order to make people's life more convenient, in order for people to say, oh, I want this. When we will be able to achieve that, then we can say that it's we've achieved certain level of interoperability, and I absolutely agree with you that the universe of IoT is so broad that it's difficult.
Is the fact that IP technology is at the center of most of the devices, is that enough, or is that still going to create the problems around the wider?
I believe that IP is an important technical step towards technical interoperability. That if all the technologies will speak IP, the interoperability or life of what's called the wireless technology agnostic APIs like OSIN or OCF or similars, it will be more accessible and more useful. But my point is that it's only a good start. It's not a final answer.
And maybe to comment on, I think that, from a devices point of view, you raise a very important point about, the IP. I think the better way of looking at it is a web-based Internet of Things. So using web technologies that are able to drive that interoperability. I think William's point about, it perhaps becomes more verticalized at the service level. But what we have to remember is that the services are driven by devices that are collecting data. And I think that breaking the tether between the service and the device will be a sort of a very important step, within the Internet of Things. So the ability to provide services that are making use of data from a broad range of devices.
I think that trust is a key point, because trust is also a concept that requires open-minded approach from the participants. And this is what I was talking about between brand A and brand B. They have to kind of be open-minded and allow this play, and in order to enable that.
I think the idea of silo mentality and IoT is almost like a fundamental contradiction in terms.
It is really, isn't it? Yes.
There's a lot going for a silo approach when you're trying to create new markets and make it fast and attractive for the to build market share. But for something like IoT, which means integrating different, not just different products, but different industries into one service, it makes that significantly more difficult. And I think there will be a lot of motivation for clever interoperability, standardization, certification.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of what governs interoperability are standards, and I know, Alex, we were talking about that.
Exactly, yeah. So just continuing this conversation around silos and what part standards have to play in breaking down those silos. There's many different standards efforts underway at the moment. How do we know which ones are the correct ones? Which ones do we need to accelerate to make sure that we're not leaving gaps or not creating new problems with different standards initiatives going in different directions?
And if anybody in this room has the answer to that question, you are a genius. Please.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's any lack of standards, and so actually the question about leaving gaps I don't think is an issue particularly. The problem, it seems to me, is, as always, too many standards.
Yeah.
Ideally, we would like to have a very small number, and in fact, if we look at any kind of analogy to any kind of other system that we use, it's one, basically. If we think of in-home connectivity, we use Wi-Fi at the connectivity level. Above that, we use IP protocols. They're single standards, and everyone coalesces around them. And actually, the world tends to drive in that direction, in so much as once one standard clearly has an edge over the others, everyone tends to adopt it because it's in their interest to do so, and that naturally drives it into a position of being the only standard, and it's why that's where we've got to in any kind of connectivity standards.
Would it be fair to say that excuse me a moment, would it be fair to say that your opinion on this has been evolving, William? Because I'm sure you've sat in on these roundtable meetings before, and I don't remember you saying previously that you thought it would come down to one standard. Have things been changing?
No, not hugely. I think I've always had the view that there would be a different inbuilt, a short range standard to long range. But certainly I do see that parallel with every other area. We have one area for personal area network, one area for Wi-Fi for local area network, one standard for cellular that we increasingly converge upon. the whole dynamics of the market are that we tend to drive towards one once it gets.
But where we are today, with so many competing standards in IoT,
think we
it
need
feels like that it's going to be much more of a challenge for one to rise to the top, because some of them are pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, many of these technologies are pretty good. My view is that all of the standards were created and developed by very capable people, solving some good problems and providing some decent solutions. And I'm aware of more than 40 wireless communication standards today.
Yes.
So solution to that probably should be at the higher level, like application layer. And I was hoping that the introduction of all-seeing was great move, but then OCF showed up, doing exactly the same thing, and just competing and not really adding real value to each other. And when I count these application layers, protocol agnostic application layers, I can count like 7, 8, and I'm not counting all of them yet. And there you already need maybe 1 or 2. I mean, somewhere you need to narrow that in order to enable.
Okay, well, maybe we can narrow it. If we're going to say that there is a possibility that we could have one all-powerful IoT standard, what would be the defining characteristics of that standard?
It's low power consumption. I think that's really critical to say enables battery operated devices. So I think I would choose that as the first one.
Okay. Low power consumption.
I think maybe just sort of as a point, by the very nature that IoT is such a generic term, and it can span so many different use cases. So as opposed to say, for example, the mobile phone market, where you look at a smartphone and understand, broadly its requirements. I think that its strength and its challenge is its diversity, and so to say, okay, there's one standard and it covers everything, I kind of feel is the wrong way of looking at how IoT will become successful.
It's not going to get awkward, is it, you two sitting next to each other?
and also maybe just to sort of raise a point that there's a hierarchy of standards. So when we say the word standard, it can mean anything from, a highly efficient IPv6 co-app implementation through to how do you provision the device, how do you manage its life cycle, how do you update its firmware, how do you make sure it's secure, how does it connect? There's a hierarchy of standards, and we need to be very mindful of that in terms of how the industry adopts those standards depending on the particular verticals that they're serving. And so, absolutely, low power is critical, unless you're putting HD cameras into the centre of London in order to record, sort of real-time motion analysis and, sort of understanding, sort of the movement of people and behaviour and so on. So it depends very much on the end user.
Do you think that battle between requirements for having a standard that really suits the application, so it might be low power for a sensor, battery operated device versus a high bandwidth requirement, do you think that requirement to have that choice, that flexibility, will ultimately override this preferred route of having one standard that fits all?
No, I don't think so. So, again, drawing analogies, right now, the emergency services around the world are struggling with the idea that they'd love to have their own system with their own technology, but it's just too expensive. Even though there are many hundreds of thousands, millions of people in that space, it's too expensive for them to roll out a national network with their own technology to provide exactly what requirements they need.
It's an interesting question. Have you ever taken time to look at your the manual of your cellular phone or smartphone? How many technologies, wireless communications technologies, are supported there? I was amazed. I did that, I admit, once, and because I get a 4G cellular phone, you think that you have one technology inside, and etc. Actually, it's a very, very long list of different communication technologies that are being supported. And I believe that at the end, situation will be like that.
Or a modular approach where it's easy to drop in?
It will support can be that things will be embedded inside, or it can be modular, but there needs to be a solution. The flavor of solution may be different, but definitely, you should be open.
I certainly agree to some degree with that, and indeed I've been talking more recently about sort of a single IoT chipset vision that has multiple physical layers on it. So I think that's true to a fair degree. I think we have to be slightly cautious. So the cell phone has the ability to put lots of stuff on there because it doesn't matter too much about the cost. So the bill of materials for the chipset that goes in the cell phone could be $60 or $70 quite easily because of all of the IP that's embedded in all those different technologies. That would probably be too much cost for multiple of IoT type devices. So we can't let it burgeon too far. But equally, we do know from silicon development that you can add a lot of stuff to a chip without making much incremental cost as long as you get the economies of scale. If you get beyond, if you get to a billion chipset market, you can do almost anything, frankly, because the economies of scale at that point drive you to optimize your design to such a level that actually a lot of extra stuff on it doesn't make too much difference. But you've got to get to about 1 billion for that.
So I think
this is a good point. Actually, pretty much agree to what I say, that you need to go into that direction, not to be afraid of this. You see, today, and the economy of scale for IoT is not here yet, up to by far. We are talking about what the Zigbee guys say, that they sell close to 100 million chips per year, and Z-Wave is less than half of that, and all others combined together, it doesn't get close to where we want to be. People are talking about billions of the devices, so we are really at the beginning of the road. And at this stage, I think that some kind of breakthrough ideas should be. Also, I don't like this word breakthrough because we are all expecting revolution, but probably this will happen as evolution, not revolution.
One related question, I've got my own views on this already, but I thought it was an interesting question just to throw out there. We talked about gateways quite a bit there. What will be the role of the gateway in the future with many of the low power, wide area network technologies that are being rolled out, NB-IoT, LoRa, Sigfox, weightless? Will that gateway still form the same function, or will the gateway just be in the cloud with these devices directly communicating?
I believe that gateway will stay at home. You have Wi-Fi, you have streaming, and this will not be replaced by LoRa or similar, who have a very, very limited bandwidth. They have a great range, but they have very limited bandwidth. And again, the use cases will be so different. For example, today, operators are expanding their presence at home by providing smart home services, and they are building up on their existing gateways which are at home. This is a big force and a very considerable business consideration that will not go away easily, in my opinion.
No, I kind of agree.
And at home there may be. Actually, we had an interesting discussion yesterday about this. I mean, how many gateways is tolerable at home? Is it 1 or 2 or 3? I don't know. It won't be 0, but probably, 10 will be not tolerable at all. So there will be some number of gateways, probably more than 1, that can be tolerable at home, but it all depends on the context.
It's effectively short range and long range. So we've sort of been talking about the home now and the short range, and I think that's right, that by and large the gateway resides in the home. It's what we see with Wi-Fi usage at the moment. But equally, you use your cell phone at home, and that doesn't go into your home gateway. It goes straight out to the cellular network, and the gateway then is effectively to the PSTN and to the internet at the point where the cellular operator has interconnection. And we'll also have long-range systems, and the gateway there will be the gateway to from that operator, from the Sigfox or the weightless operator or whatever, into whatever databases that those end users want to interconnect.
I somewhat disagree with that because when I'm at home, all my browsing I'm doing through Wi-Fi and the gateway. I do not connect. If I will connect to my 4G or through a service provider, it will be very costly for me.
But if you get an incoming call on your cell phone, you don't decline it and then
calls, yes.
wait for it to come back.
The calls I understand, but
this
is an interesting
example from the mobile world that perhaps moves into the IoT world, because there's a huge growth in voice over Wi-Fi. Yeah, and the cellular operators are recognizing the need to offload their licensed spectrum and use sort of local area coverage within the home. And so today, if you make a call at home, there's a very good chance that you could make that call over Wi-Fi, as well as having a fallback to a wide area technology. Now, if you look at what's happening, that gateway is also becoming a termination point for the service that's coming into the home. So the cellular operators are looking at that and saying, okay, I can support voice over Wi-Fi, but then I can also start to support some other applications, some wider IoT applications, because I have that entry point into the home. And so I think the gateway has an interesting kind of route, again, back to the security, a route of trust and ability to run a secure, trusted service to the home, at which point you can then break out to kind of open market sensors, light bulbs, switches, and so on. And as a consumer, that's probably a good thing, because I can then choose my service provider and move my service based on what I'm looking for by having control over that gateway.
Well, all of this, everything we're talking about so far is all about ways to manipulate data. Data is what it's all about. Data is what everybody wants. How are we going to ensure that the data that is captured, analysed and acted upon doesn't create new and massive privacy and data protection issues?
So first of all, I'm not sure it's our role to fully ensure that, in the same way it's not the role of Vodafone to ensure that any data that goes through your cell phone via an app is protected. That's not Vodafone's job. It's Vodafone's job to make sure that it's properly protected to the point it's delivered out of their network, but they don't then demand that Starbucks treat it in a certain way. So similarly, no one person can control the whole of IoT data right up to its point where it's stored in the cloud and subsequently used. So I think you have to look at each stage of the chain and say, is that stage appropriately secured? And then maybe some guidelines for beyond that.
But I think at a very simplistic level, most of these companies developing apps, etc., are assuming that they will be able to use the data that they capture for their own commercial purposes, without inviting the actual owner of the data to give them permission to do so.
So I think first
they
of all,
are asking for your permission from the beginning usually.
But I think that's almost the wrong question. Who owns data? If you buy something on Amazon, do you own the data about that transaction, or does Amazon own the data about that transaction? I don't think anyone owns that data as such. It's a piece of data that's been generated due to a transactional element between a number of parties, and that data then exists. It's not. It doesn't.
Or is it? I mean, if we went into a shoe shop 20 years ago and bought a pair of shoes, we didn't think we were entering into a relationship with that vendor that allowed them to then manipulate our own details for evermore in any way that they wanted to do so. But because we've gone digital now, that is the case. Should it be?
Yeah, I
It
think
shouldn't, because if I just pay online or pay with my credit card, physical credit card in the shop, actually it should be treated as the same event.
I mean, the fact that you're here today.
But are you then happy for that same shop to start sending you emails or whatever, inviting you to buy more things?
Sometimes I agree.
Because by and large, we don't get the choice.
You know, interesting story. Just this morning I downloaded a new app, which was an interesting keypad option. And one of the things that I got there that you need to enable always access. And then I get from iOS message, be careful because these guys will report everything, including the data. If you allow, then they can record everything, including your credit card numbers or your transactions and etc. What do you do then? I immediately said don't. Okay, but there are cases that you would allow if you see a benefit again. Trade of benefit, of course, and it's a personal view, always personal view, whether you would go into this kind of relationship or say, no, I just want to stay.
And actually, my take is the IoT will improve things in so much as if you're selling, let's say, a washing machine that's going to be connected, the last thing you want is your brand to be associated with a loss of privacy or mistreatment of the customers. That's the end of your brand. Actually, what you want your brand to be associated with is one that is a long-term great relationship with the customer in a way that suits everyone. So you're going to be very, very cautious about what you do in that space. If you do abuse things, you're probably out of business fairly quickly. So I suspect actually things will get better rather than worse in this future world.
I think you're assuming a level of trust that
does not exist from my personal experience, and I hear that in UK the situation is even worse. Of all this stamp,
I'd love it to be the way you're
nuisance-
describing. I just
nuisance
don't think it
calls
will
and
be.
get people getting information about it, and etc. It's not.
I think it comes down to like having sensible regulations on this stuff. Like, for example, now going forward, there will be this what is the name of it? GPRT, the European Union's new regulations for personal data protection, which then stipulates a very kind of well-defined kind of cost of business if you breach those regulations. If you get reckless about customer data, then it can be up to 2% of your global turnover. So it kind of then if you play fast and loose with data, then you have to take it into your risk management and potentially pay the penalty one day. So I would
But
still emphasize
I think
regulations.
this data, we're at the start, let's say we're at the start of the curve. Data is a valuable good, and I don't think most of us realize how valuable that is. And going into the IoT age, it will become more valuable. And I think there has to be a sort of almost like a campaign towards the user that this is something you have to take care of. This is something that's quite valuable. In fact, that has a value that you can use towards somebody selling you a service. At the other side of the coin is the transparency that it offers to people like insurance companies, utilities, providers, etc., so that it becomes like, I'm getting things tailored towards my tastes, which are a little bit strange as it is. I'm starting to feel like too transparent here. So there has to be an educational process, starting in the schools even, towards children about the value of that data.
I personally am I'm up for being accused of being very old-fashioned, because I actually think this requires regulation.
Yeah.
Because I do not think you can trust the commercial world to act properly in this area.
We did some research a couple of years ago, a consumer survey in the US, and data was second only to cost in terms of barriers for consumers taking up IoT applications.
So I think what we'll see as a result is we'll move slowly and steadily in this space, like we have done everywhere else. The first IoT stuff will probably be industrial IoT. There's no personal data involved at all. It's just some machine somewhere collecting data about soil moisture levels and sending it on. Who cares if it's private or not private? It doesn't really matter. It's just how much rain's falling in that space. And then we'll gradually start having a connected washing machine. But all it'll do is send a report once a month on whether it's still working fine or not. That'll be okay. And then gradually over time, we'll start to experiment with other things. But I think it'll be a long time before we start sending all our heart rate monitoring information every second to all sorts of places in the cloud.
And how important do you think that the point that Danny made earlier about that trade-off, giving something back in return for giving up some of your privacy?
But and yes, but look at what happens. The moment you get free Gmail, you say yes, sure, tick tick tick. The moment you get a supermarket store card that says you get 1% back on your expenditures, tick tick tick. History shows us that actually, I think most people value the totality of all their data at about £20 or something. It's almost nothing. So all you have to do is give them the most minor of, you get something for free, and people will do it.
Yeah, but if you think about the amount of data you have now in the cloud, I mean, most of us, I would assume, is the same: banking, medical, etc. It does get scary to think that somebody could be in possession of that, and who's not rightfully in possession of it. So there's a duty of care.
Sure.
And just data protection is security as well.
Yeah, we often look at security as quite a separate thing to data privacy. The systems that go into market today in relation to IoT, how vulnerable do people think they are to security? Are the suppliers ensuring that security, not so much to privacy relation, but just in terms of how secure the systems are to hacking? Are those systems secure enough? Is there any hope of any global structure around security that might be rolled out in relation to IoT?
I think there's a quite substantial difference between consumer-facing IoT and then this enterprise and industrial, which is more like an extension to industrial automation. And I would say security in like the industrial side is reasonably robust already. Whereas consumer IoT is more like a Wild West. Like you see also the wacky security implications from things that started from a Kickstarter, and the priority has been just to move fast and get it done, and then sort out the security later.
But maybe a comment on that for, if you look at industrial, it tends to be more vertically integrated. So those security issues are addressed kind of, from top to bottom. But it doesn't scale broader, and perhaps, you could argue it doesn't need to. If you're running industrial plant processes, you don't need those to be open and interoperable. You can solve those security problems directly. Consumer is an excellent example because there's varying levels of security enabled in different devices. And I think that today, if I'm counting steps on my wearable, am I worried about the security of that? Well, maybe not too much, but maybe in the future, if I'm tracking, my heart rhythm, my blood glucose, my body temperature, and so on. So I have a kind of a vital set of measurements that I'm sharing, maybe with a healthcare provider. Then you meet this kind of crossover point where you're moving between what we would regard as a kind of a industrial, vertically integrated use case to something that is broader. And I think that to build those valuable services in the consumer space, you do need to start to have more robust, standards-driven levels of security.
But is this something that can be tackled by the industry, or do governments and regulators need to step in and have a part in the play of addressing security and data protection?
I think it's hand in hand, actually. Regulation tends to be, the right touch to enable the market. So I think that, having devices that have baked in security, kind of from the foundation is important. So as a consumer, if I'm buying that, maybe that even has like a logo or something in a recognizable way, so that I could be buying something. It has a set of principles that the consumer can understand in everyday layman's terms. I think government can help with those set of principles, so they can drive how a device should behave and how a consumer interacts with that. So rather than racing through the tick list and going, yes, 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 and I'll share everything and not really understand what that means. I think that, if the consumer is guided through that, educated in that process, and that is regulated just at the right level, it then helps the equipment vendors to build accordingly and to actually drive products into that space.
I think as well, so to build on that a bit, it's what governments and regulators can do is probably more about information than it is about anything else. If regulators suddenly say, actually you have to have 256 level AES encryption, that could be the wrong answer. But if actually what happens is you get periodic information where it might be the press or certain sources that says, actually that application is really insecure, to take it at your own risk, then actually that will drive people away from that very, very quickly. So it'll encourage people to do things that doesn't put them in that particular camp.
Well, there is some thinking that says that for the IoT to succeed, consumers basically have to abandon all hope of any data protection or privacy and so on. Do we feel that which way is it going to go? Is this going to be a properly regulated and managed market, or should everybody just forget trying to maintain any privacy of their own data?
A data free for all. Well, I hope it's not going to be the case. There's a lot going for that in terms of building the market, but because there's so much integration of industries, you're going across industries with IoT. You'll have a Google involved in car manufacture as much as entertainment options or content delivery. It will mean that there has to be some point of control, or somebody who's, as you say, David, instructing the user, or making sure that the regulation is there to enable the market, but also to control certain elements of it. Otherwise, as you say, a Wild West type of scenario could ensue.
It's interesting that you mentioned the car, because that is today probably one of the most high-profile IoT devices that people are coming into contact with today, because so much technology is being packed into cars now. They are massive data capturers. And there is a big debate going on at the moment in the automotive industry between the car companies and the likes of Google and Apple and lots of platform providers in the middle about how to manage and who owns that data. This is probably one of the most forefront IoT data collection and analysis devices today.
Yeah, will also become a serious, let's say, or a potential weak link in the security chain because you have so much of your data in there. That's going to be a challenge for the car industry. I think there's already some examples out there how to protect a stream of data which is inherent in the car about yourself, or in fact about the car itself, to control its whereabouts and whether it works.
Well,
or not.
whoever's got access to that data knows what sort of state the car's in, knows where it's been, the user's habits, where they go, how often they go there, times of day that they travel, etc.
But I guess it depends on your view on whether you're optimist or pessimist. I see that as a fantastically good thing. The manufacturer of that data, treated it well, can enrich your driving experience. It can enrich society. It can improve congestion. It can do a lot of really good stuff. Now, yes, you can imagine that potentially, particularly if you're engaged in having an affair and you don't want your wife to know and you drive somewhere, and then there might be a downside. But I think the downsides are very, very
racy for our meetings, wouldn't it?
are very tiny, actually. So, let's say suddenly somebody knows exactly where I've been driving for the last 5 years. Do I give a damn? I give a damn. It's
unless you want this to be hidden.
Via your car's infotainment system, Starbucks sends you a message to say you're only 5 minutes away. Why not pop in and have a cup of coffee?
So that might be valuable to me. If I think I don't like it and I can't turn it off, then I'll tell Starbucks I'm not going to use it again. But I think those options are great options to have. And it seems to me this is opening up a whole world of new stuff that we should actually embrace and try and encourage, not try and discourage by being very pessimistic about the outcome. Because I suspect whenever there is a bad outcome, and there will be some, we know from the internet that there'll be people who abuse this, then the forces that be, whether they be government or whether they be commercial forces, tend to act in such a way as to restrain that. But actually, would we say, I'll never use the internet again because it's exposed my private data to the outside world? I don't think anyone would ever give up on the internet.
No, but I think the focus has got to be on the automatic option being opt-in rather than an assumption that you're ready to be marketed to. Opt-in has got to be the key, surely.
And that trust as well, and that's where I think it'll come down to, that trust that some companies may abuse, but other companies, if they really want to succeed, they've got to build up that trust of making data applicable.
They've got to build the trust up. I think the opt-in doesn't work. We've got it with cookies.
You know what?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure that sometimes you don't want to pay that price. I agree with you. I agree with you in analysis, but there are cases that you will be willing to pay that price of less convenience in order to stay more secure.
So I'm quite happy when I log into my bank, but I have to type in passwords, and if I go through a transaction, I have to get this little calculator thing out and do all that. I'm happy with that inconvenience because the downside that I can think of someone raiding my bank account is very high. So I agree. There are certain cases when you accept that. But when I log on to Starbucks, I don't want to go through a whole process of typing in my password every single time and agreeing to opt into everything every time I do it or whatever.
Obviously, IoT is drawing the attraction of the whole plethora of different company types that want to play a part in the market. I was at the IoT World event in Santa Clara a few weeks ago, and every company under the sun had a platform that they were launching around IoT. So what do we think in terms of who are the real important company types that are going to be shaping IoT in the future? Is it the systems integrators, the service providers, the consumer electronics companies, the telcos, the SIGs and other standardization bodies? Who do we think is going to be the most innovative and influential over the
It's my feeling, at least. You're going to have the usual suspects: Amazon, Google, Apple. But I think there's going to be a sort the let's say the coming of age of a different type of alliance going across industries. Possibly companies that can master that will be the ones who are stronger first, who challenge their business models today, that may work with sale of goods and maybe some services, to being one where you will cross the border between a service provider, equipment maker, and integrator.
It's evolved, hasn't it? Because at one time we used to think that if there would be companies creating the massive technology platforms that were going to control our lives, it would be the likes of SAP and people like this, Ericsson, whoever. But now it is being driven more by much more front-facing companies like Google and so on. It's the world is evolving, isn't it?
Every wave of new technology, new development brings also the bunch of new companies. Google didn't exist prior to internet era. I believe that continuing what Daniel said, that IoT creates really opportunity for new types of business models, which we are not aware, and we are just struggling to understand and guess what is the right approach. And there is a possibility that Google and Apple will not be as successful as some other companies that will emerge, that will work well with IoT.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got companies now who I believe have been created purely to exploit the IoT opportunity and who are developing products like Fitbit, whatever, which are all about capturing data. I'm sure these companies aren't making money on selling these little, $50 or $100 devices. They're all about creating a scenario where they're going to be able to manipulate data that's captured from their customers.
Yeah, this is one way or one area where these companies...
I mean, let's face it, Amazon was probably the first to do that.
But even that's kind of a bit pejorative, manipulating data from their customers. How about enabling their customers to benefit from the aggregation intelligence data that they gather? Is perhaps a better way to look at it. But my take overall, I think, is the Internet of Things, in some cases, will transform industries. In other cases, it will simply allow them to be a bit more productive, a bit more efficient. So I don't imagine the Internet of Things will transform the car industry. I think it will just allow the car to send more data reports and so on. I don't expect to see a new car company emerge that purely is an Internet of Things kind of car developer.
I'm going to jump in there, because
how about electronic cars?
I've talked to a lot of the car companies now through publishing my Connected Car magazine, and probably half a dozen of the major car companies have publicly stated that they're all transforming their businesses into digital businesses which are about earning money out of something other than selling cars. And it's a fundamental change of policy for most of them.
Yes, actually, from the car industry,
BMW's publicly stated it, Audi's stated it.
They are actually stating that the most important part in the selection when buying cars is your dashboard.
Sure.
What you offer there.
But
it's not an engine, it's not an engine size anymore, it's not the reliability, it's not that.
It's a digital economy question in
Yes.
the end. So if you look at, the Internet of Things isn't the end product.
No.
The Internet of Things is the enabler.
Yeah.
So the question is, well, what is the end product? So by driving broad digital economy view across different verticals, you bring, as William was saying, efficiencies. So driving the low carbon economy, making everything more efficient, just using less bad stuff, I don't know, just using less carbon, through to delivering value-added services to the consumer. Certainly within my role at ARM, I spend more time talking to people who are not in the semiconductor industry now, because we recognise the need to, enable the innovators, nurture them. If you bring that innovation with the right set of tools, then it will happen. The right answers will gradually come. And I think we're just at the beginning of that at the moment.
But I think what William said there earlier is a very good point. There's not only bad data or data that can be abused. There's also data which makes us, let's say, has a value is value for us as the creator of it.
Of course.
And things that we wouldn't have associated with today, that it's actually a bargaining tool then to land a very good contract somewhere.
Well, do we think there's going to an aftermarket will develop for IoT providers to sell data that has been captured and then which can be mined by third parties?
So it already exists. Conference organisers sell the list of delegates to other people. That kind of thing has been around for decades, if not centuries. the selling of valuable data from one entity to another. It'll be just the same in IoT. Yes, there'll be situations where that happens, but I think people will be cautious. Banks are not going to sell the information on the size of your money in your bank account. They might pass on some other or overdraft. Yeah. They might potentially pass on some anonymized data or whatever, but they're not going to give out certain information because they know that the downside of that is too great. But other information, yeah, absolutely, just in the same way that it's sold now.
How do we think we're going to break down these barriers? Going back a little bit to some of the original points on siloed data sets here, I think the real advantage of IoT will be when, if I give an example, one area that we were looking at recently was how IoT could impact the shipping industry and how data on the ship's locations and what they're carrying is extremely siloed compared to the port's capacity and how well utilised they're being used. And then the transit companies' logistics in terms of taking deliveries and making sure that they're at the right time and the right place. And feedback is that at the moment those data sets aren't tied together at all, and so the technology might be there for IoT to be pulling all that data together, but no way can the barriers be broken down so it can be used as well as it could be because everyone's got their own vested interest. How industry is going to break down that kind of barrier?
To some degree, ingenuity breaks it down. So you could argue the same in terms of transport. So if you want to know which buses are running on time, which trains are running on time, or whatever, that data is in completely different places, in completely different formats. But you can get apps that sort of aggregate the whole lot together, pull data from each of those different areas, and say to you, actually, your best bet to get across London is, in fact, to take this underground train at this point in time because that bus is delayed. So similarly, you can have a situation like that. Now, of course, the data has to be available, but if the app provider can persuade people that it's actually in their interest to do that, I think they can effectively use intelligence to pull that all together.
Okay, well, let's just flick to one other aspect of the security side of IoT. The recent story about a Jeep Cherokee being hacked and driven off the road in the USA generated a massive amount of publicity, as you would expect. What can be done to bolster confidence that valuable assets can't be hacked and affected?
Stories like that, I think that's been an incredible wake-up call, and you now see car companies, as you said, inviting hackers to have a go at their cars, which they wouldn't have done before that story, probably. But now they realise that actually there's potential issues there, problems.
But whose responsibility was it there? Obviously, you've got the Jeep, the car itself. You've got the infotainment system from Harman, in the case of that car, and then the QNX operating system inside the car. Whose responsibility was it to make sure that car didn't get hacked?
Well, I would say it was Jeep's, because that's from the customer's point of view, they haven't bought separate elements and bought them together. They bought a complete system, and in the same way that whenever you buy a complete piece of clothing or whatever, you don't then say, well, actually it's the fault of the person that makes the stitching or the buttons that this has come apart. You go back to...
But in a legal sort of framework, if it came down to litigation, if a crash or an incident was caused, a death or a crash, is that Jeep's responsibility, or is it then come down to the standards bodies that may have put a standard together?
So you cannot be clear of liability or responsibility.
But I think in that case, the damage done to Jeep is pretty severe. They're probably far less worried about a potential for £1 million fine from some lawyer than they are the fact that they may sell 10% fewer vehicles next year because people think that they're dodgy vehicles.
It's been a wake-up call to the automotive industry, there's no question about that, and I think the car companies are now seeing that they do have to take a high degree of responsibility. The sad thing is it's happened because of outside influences rather than them realising from the start that they needed to do that. I think we probably all agree that the Internet of Things is going to happen. It will be massive.
Yeah.
It will affect all of our lives.
Yes.
But in the short to medium term, do we think that enough is being done to ensure that products that are being promoted into Internet of Things applications, cases, etc., are being developed sufficiently well such that customers don't end up being put off by products that don't work well?
I don't think so. I think, first of all, people don't really understand Internet of Things per se. They understand a connected thermostat and they understand a connected car. If they had a bad experience with a connected thermostat, I don't think that would stop them buying a connected car. They would see them as quite different. I think as well that actually you have to evolve in this space. The iPhone didn't appear magically as the first cell phone we ever had. It took a lot of development and understanding of the way people worked and so on, with some bad things that went wrong, like WAP and so on. And that didn't stop people using the phone for internet either. We're going to have to go through a process of evolution where things develop and we understand how people use them, how they want to use them, what the business models are. Some will fail, and we'll have some early adopters that get their fingers burnt, but that's what they're used to.
Do we even think that in 10 years' time we'll be discussing IoT? Do we think we'll just be talking about thermostats, they're always connected? We're talking about efficiencies in manufacturing because we've got good data. Will IoT still be a discussion point in 10 years' time, or will it just be the new norm?
Most likely we'll be talking about something else, but the idea that we're going to have bad experiences with IoT, I don't think you can't really discount that. But I mean, like it or not, standards are good. And that's sort of the starting point for making things work together. But even more important, at least building on that, is interoperability. So if you do certification for your technology, for your products, then it has to be, at least my opinion, based on some kind of real world interoperability.
Okay, well, I think IoT has been a very handy little IoT TLA to cover what is actually a massive concept. Yes. We usually ask at the end of this question the awkward one, how long until the IoT is a reality? But let's take it a little stage away from that. How long do we think it's going to be until we stop actually talking about IoT and IoT is actually just part of our lives?
10 years.
10 years.
Within that frame. I think the term itself will go away, and then we refer to products themselves or like verticals.
Yeah. Abi, how many years do you think? I'm going around the group, by the way, now, so prepare your answer. 10 to 15, until we've stopped talking about IoT and it's
Yes, it's like, who's talking about VoIP? 20 years ago, everybody was talking about VoIP and how to do it and etc. and that what it will be that revolution, and nobody saw any revolution. It simply happened. And I think that we are in the similar process with IoT also.
I think if you think about the rate of change or the speed of the rate of change in our industry since 2006, let's say 10 years, iPhone introduction is phenomenal.
Yes.
And if it continues at that pace, then I can't see it successively getting faster. So why not 2020, 2021, 22, something like that?
That's pretty quick. That's pretty soon. Interesting. David, what do you think?
I'll bring it forward. I think it's already happening.
I know, but we are still talking about it.
We are still talking about it.
Yeah.
So as I said before, for me, IoT is an enabler and not the endpoint. So we're talking about it. The reason we're talking about it is because we don't understand the endpoint fully.
It's a tricky question in a way, because it's a bit like saying, well, when do we stop talking about the internet? Well, we've never stopped talking about the internet, but we've gone from a stage where people didn't really know what it was to one where people have got a conception of what it is. They might not know what it might be, but at least if you say to somebody, do you use the internet? That question for them makes some sort of sense, and they can say, yes, I order on Amazon every day, or yes, I use Facebook. It makes some sense.
So you actually think it'll become effectively a brand that consumers are aware of? Because it's basically people in the industry talking about Internet of Things now, but you think it's going to move out from the industry to become a term that people on the street are familiar with?
I think there'll be some sort of collective term in the same way that we use the word internet or internet enabled to badge a general concept of connectivity. I think there'll be some general term. Maybe we'll call it connected devices rather than Internet of Things. I don't know.
Sure. What's your view?
I think perhaps the term might become unfashionable within the industry quite quickly. I think there was certainly a time when every company, analyst firms, guilty as well, but others that were manufacturers are really keen to say how many billion devices. The bigger the number, the better. And I think there's become a sense of people want, realism around that now, and it's moved on from the discussion just about connectivity to now, well, what else can that do? I'm connected. What does that mean? What are we going to do with the data? How can we improve processes? So I think that conversation has moved on quite a bit. I also think that the rate will be different for different industries, and consumers moved relatively quickly. But something like industrial automation, there's long cycles, and I think the full realization, whether we're still calling it Internet of Things or something different within that industry, I'm not sure, but I think the rate at which different industries and vertical application areas take full advantage of what IoT offers will happen at different rates. But I'd certainly, if we're still using the term in 10 years' time to the extent that we are now, I'd be very surprised.
Okay, well, as usual, at the end of one of these meetings, I think that we have barely scratched the surface of all of the implications, the potential, the opportunities, the risks represented by the IoT and the way it will affect our lives over the coming years. The reality is that that's great news because it means we can carry on staging these meetings and talking about it for the foreseeable future. I'd like to thank you all for your contribution today. Great meeting. To our public, our next meeting is in Las Vegas at the beginning of January alongside CES. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing you then.